we are just so pleased, first of all, that you are representing many of us here in Congress, and certainly your expertise as a physician, a father, and a concerned member here of Congress. Yes. The whole issue of sex education is one that has great importance for every family out there that has children or grandchildren. Would you mind sharing with us how, as a physician, it's so important that a sexual risk avoidance message be given priority?
Well, yeah, thank you for that question, Valerie. And certainly going forward through the education and development of a child, teenager, and then young adult, it's important for them to understand biological functions, and that's something that is important, and certainly in raising our kids, my wife and I explained the very basics of biology, the important thing that children should know growing up. They shouldn't be caught off guard by myths or fairy tales or fantasies or anything like that. But many people who support comprehensive sex education go into it with the assumption that education is somehow the end-all, that knowing all the answers, knowing all the truths, somehow is going to protect a child. And really there's no evidence to support that. In fact, if you look at drug treatment and drug education, we find the same thing, the so-called DARE program, which lots of money is spent on. And while it's laudable and worthy in many ways that we teach kids about the dangers of drugs and the use and so forth, simply educating them has not accomplished any improvement in the outcomes in terms of drug abuse or drug addiction. So back to this subject, what is missing from comprehensive drug education is teaching the values that really parents have an investment in their children, to make sure that they understand the value of waiting till they have a fully committed marital relationship, to engage in what is a very serious relationship between two human beings, and that is the most intimate contact possible, which is a sexual relationship. And there's a lot of responsibility that goes with that, and certainly a lot of problems. Sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancies, things that change one's life in such a negative way oftentimes. And certainly a young person who is not prepared mentally to go into the results of a sexual relationship can have a terrible impact. So I think that's a thing lacking out of comprehensive sex education, is it's a valueless type of atmosphere. What it really does is it provides an inference that values are not important, and that it's not about values, it's about avoiding the negative outcome of a behavior. And what's interesting is those who are fully trained in all of the aspects of that, such as condom use, such as birth control and all of that, the studies show that group still has much higher instances of sexually transmitted disease and unwanted pregnancies. Yeah. So if education was the solution to the problem, why is it not working? And you know that we're spending $16 to $1 into the sexual educational process rather than, of course, the value teaching of abstinence, the fact that young people should not engage in sexual activity until it's the proper time in their lives to do so. And I really think that there's a tremendous yearning. I know in my own experience as a physician and as a parent that children I've dealt with over the years are simply not ready for that until they reach a certain age and a certain status in life. And they look to us as parents and as responsible people to send that signal to them. On the other hand, as young people, they want to experiment, they want to have new experiences in life, but they look to us to create the limitations in that, and they also look to us to tell them why they should wait and not just go headlong into that kind of activity.
That is so true. And a lot of parents think that their teen children are not listening to them, but every single survey of students, when they're asked who they want to receive information about dating and sexual activity and setting boundaries, it's always mom and dad. How do you think that information can empower parents, to take their rightful place as the
Yes.
primary sex educators of their children?
Well, it does. It gives tremendous power to parents. And again, parents oftentimes abdicate that power. They say, well, let's let the school handle that. That's really an educational process. And many parents are actually uncomfortable in that discussion. My wife and I were up against that challenge. My wife is a nurse, and I'm a physician, and it was a little bit, challenging even for us.
Yeah.
But what we did is we found excellent reading materials, books and things that were age appropriate. And we would go over that, some of them not only with pictures, but 3D little models and things that talked about anatomy, that talked about function, and that gave the important aspects for kids to understand about sexuality, but did not send them down the road in areas that were totally unnecessary, and certainly didn't indoctrinate them into agendas and so forth that you see so much today that may arise out of sexual education to children or risk avoidance type of education. So if the parents will accept that challenge and they'll grab that mantle, they can be so powerful. However, nothing speaks more than the actual behavior of the parent. Mm-hmm. You see, if you're a parent who is having a relationship with someone else that's not in a committed or certainly in a marital relationship, then that also says something to kids as well. So I think there is a tremendous power, but there's also a tremendous responsibility that we have to model our behavior for our kids so that they will see what are the successful future behaviors for adults. And we look at outcomes and we see that children brought up in a one-parent relationship, particularly a mother-only relationship, their outcomes in terms of education, in terms of imprisonment for crime, and poverty were all negative. And so these are all things that we need to think a few steps ahead as we raise our kids and say, what is it about what I tell them? What about it is it about the empowerment process? What is it about what I need to do as a parent? And certainly how I need to behave as a parent that's going to be so effectual on the life of that child or children. In the case of my family, we have 4 kids, all now raised to adulthood, all proving themselves to be very responsible in their own behavior.
Well, as you know, abstinence education funding and abstinence education programming as a part of federal sex ed policy really got its broad national start as a result of the Welfare Reform Act. Mm-hmm. And as such, Congress recognized that one of the number one predictors of poverty was non-marital parenting. And so I think that the message that you just shared is not only true, but it has a reality in the need for abstinence education. Obviously, my number one preference, and I'm sure yours, is that the federal government wouldn't be involved at all in
Absolutely.
Sex education, but that it would be parents who
Yes.
take that on. The reality is probably never going to leave federal sex. There's probably never going to not be a federal sex ed
Right.
policy anymore.
Yes.
So it's really important that
Right.
young people receive what's really important.
Yes.
You probably are familiar with the CDC study that showed 1 in 4 teen girls have at least one sexually transmitted disease.
Yes.
And of those 4 STDs, it was trichomoniasis, HSV, HPV, and gonorrhea, I believe. Mm-hmm. 2 of those 4 can be transmissible even with the use of a condom.
Right.
So from your perspective as a physician, why is the abstinence message superior to just saying everything will just be fine as long as you use a condom, which is the current federal
Sure.
sex ed policy?
Well, first of all, as a physician who's practiced 36 years, I've never seen a person become pregnant who didn't have sex. And I've never seen a person get a sexually transmitted disease without first having sex. And so I can guarantee you virtually 100% chance that if a young person or an adult in that matter, when appropriate, practice sexual abstinence, that they don't have to worry about those issues. Now, of course, the presumption is, well, if we have condoms and we have other sorts of techniques that would prevent those from happening, then why is it that among the most sexually astute population, who has the most sexual exposure, the most frequency, and therefore the most knowledge about sex in general, why is it that they're the ones with most of the sexual diseases? Twice as many adolescent girls have sexually transmitted diseases than those who are less sexually active. Those who are more involved in sexual activity logarithmically have more sexual diseases, and some of them are not curable, and some of them can be very damaging, particularly in females, damaging the inner workings, which have a very delicate balance in terms of the anatomy of a female in future reproduction, which I'm sure that they, at some point in their lives, would wish to have a family. And those options are oftentimes cut off as a result of early sexual behavior, which leads to sexual diseases. So I think that it's clear to say that as sexual activity goes up, so goes sexually transmitted disease, as well as unwanted pregnancies. And even in the case of, let's say that you teach and promote abstinence among young people, that yes, it is possible there may be some failures. There may be kids who do get involved in sexual activity, but it would be much less in frequency, therefore much less likelihood to see pregnancy and less likelihood to see disease. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be 100% to be effective. And so that's important. But again, back to the risk reduction, the sexual education piece of this that's being promoted by government, again, there is absolutely no proof that teaching kids how to use barrier protections, how to pleasure one another, if you will, and somehow avoid the consequences. Well, there's no statistics that back that there's any effectiveness of that. Those are the same kids who are going to end up with the problems. And another interesting statistic is that over the last decade or so, the frequency or the percentage of kids who are not sexually active is actually going up, believe it or not. So where's the assumption that comes from the other side, who wants to teach sexual education, who say, look, they're going to do it anyway. So why even try to talk to them about holding off from having sex, when in fact it's actually happening without any real concerted effort? And why? Because again, kids are making those choices. They're making those value choices. They don't want to take the risk. They're seeing the consequences of that behavior. And I think even beyond that, I think more and more parents are becoming engaged and realize that sexual education, comprehensive sex education, as promoted by the government, is failing in its promises. And parents are stepping back into the equation and saying, you know, I've got to take back the power here. I need to take back the control. And I think parents should be fearless in that. I think to abdicate this responsibility to the government, or to assume that kids are going to do it anyway, so you might as well just try to protect them. I just, again, there's no statistics, there's no science out there that backs that is any way viable.
Which really moves the conversation now to the public policy aspect, and that is, despite the fact that the targeted age for sex education is typically 15 to 17-year-olds. Yes. Almost 75% of that age group has never had sex. So it kind of begs the question, why then is there a 16-to-1 disparity between teaching comprehensive sex ed at $16 to abstinence education for $1? It's really not the dollars so much as the policy priorities.
Yes.
This has unfortunately been a very high-pitched debate, but it shouldn't be.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it amazes me to see, for instance, a video from, say, a TV documentary where you have a 15-year-old girl who is not sexually active and has maybe perhaps chosen not to be, who's in the classroom learning how to put a condom on a banana. That really makes no sense to me whatsoever. So once again, I see a lot of taxpayer dollars flowing into something, teaching kids something that in many cases they don't want to learn, they're not really interested in, and have chosen another pathway to begin with. So if we are looking at a 16-to-1 ratio, remember that before President Obama took office, it was $4-to-1 when it came to comprehensive sexual education versus abstinence education. Today it's 16-to-1. And again, no one can show me any statistics where the outcomes are any better. Why shouldn't we go back to 4-to-1 or 2-to-1 or 1-to-1 or go back even further than that and make it 4-to-1 abstinence? As you speak, I'm not sure that the government has a role in this to begin with. But if we're going to put money in it, for me, I think the money should be in the values. It should be in teaching the benefits and the positive outcomes to waiting, to the abstinence message. Wait until you're old enough. Wait until you're in a committed relationship, hopefully a marital relationship. When you're old enough to handle the outcomes, which may include childbirth, it may include disease. All of these things, I think, it's so important to delay that, because I think that the longer you delay it, the longer you encourage a young person to delay it, again, the less risk of sexually transmitted disease, the less likely there's going to be illegitimate births, the less risk to poverty, the less risk that the child will grow up in a home with one parent instead of two, the less likely that child is going to end up dropping out of school, the less likely that child is going to end up in prison someplace. So again, if we're going to spend the same dollars, let's get back to parity at the very least, and maybe even further than that.
Couldn't agree more. Just one final question. As a very respected member of Congress, I would say that you probably would agree that we need to take the politics out of this. So how do we get from where we are now to what you're proposing?
Well, I think that one of the biggest problems with government today, particularly the federal government, is that we let our social agendas lead policy. And in many cases, we backfill the science based on what our own personal beliefs and agendas are. And that's true in many areas of government today. I think we need to lead with the information. We need to lead with the science. If the science tells us that the better outcomes come with abstinence education rather than comprehensive sex education, well then let the dollars flow there. Everything else about the economy in the private sector works that way. Money is always attracted to the better ideas. So why is it that we force money into the worse ideas? Only government can do that, and only government can get away with not being able to show any good results for doing that. So I think that's something not only in this arena but in other areas of government when it comes to entitlement programs, welfare in general, the energy sector, many other areas of government. So much is being led by the social agenda, so much is being led by politics, and then we do what we can to find some study someplace that backs up what we do. Let's just start with a clean slate and say, what do the numbers tell us? What does the data tell us? What does the science tell us? And again, the science in this area tells us abstinence works. Comprehensive sexual education fails. And that's something that parents need to be empowered with in terms of their knowledge base and information. And they should be bold in this. They should take the reins. They should take the mantle. They should go with it. I know it's in their gut. Don't listen to the politicians. Listen to what your heart tells you. Listen to what your mind tells you. And that is, your child is your responsibility. And that is a future adult someday. And they're going to be raising children. And if you really want to do it right, you need to take the responsibility to train them up first with values and then with information. And the outcome will be much better.
Well, Congressman, I couldn't agree more, and I really hope that an objective conversation looking at what is in the best health interest of young people can start afresh this discussion, and we appreciate your leadership and your thoughts on this.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Valerie.
Appreciate it.
Yes.